So for those who don't know me, I am Madhur Upadhyay. To me, knowledge is important. However, knowledge is good to know theoretically a lot about things, but experience is the key. When you start connecting those dots of knowledge, and suddenly that knowledge starts acquiring some kind of shape that can be utilized, channeled, and taken leverage from to improve your life, practice, and overall your well-being. By experience, I do not mean that a clinician working in the clinics and seeing patients after patients. Well, that is one way of acquiring experience. But I think experience is an amalgamation of doing research or / reading research, talking a lot about what you have acquired over the years. So it's a combination of clinical knowledge, it's a combination of research, and then finally, it boils down to you discussing all the acquired wisdom with your colleagues and friends, be it through teaching, discussions, meetings, etc. I have been fortunate enough to gain now some experience in aligners over the years because I've been involved with it in various capacities. And that is why I would like to put out a particular disclaimer so that you can analyze what I am saying based on my background. Please take all the information that I have to share with you with a little grain of salt. This is one of my first patients who I happened to treat with aligners. I was told at that point that these are good patients to start aligners with. We do not have a lot of malocclusion going on, and the case is supposedly straightforward. So this patient had the main issue of this midline diastema that you can see in the front. And she also had some basic generalized spacing, but as you can see, nothing serious going on. So the plan was pretty simple, close the gaps. She never wanted braces. She absolutely refused it. So of course, went to aligners, and we went ahead and did the treatment. Spaces were closed. The teeth are showing some kind of lateral open bite, a little bit of cross bite or edge to edge bite on the right side and even on the left side. It's almost like a general squeeze of the whole arch. So of course you went through refinement, did refinement number 1, we did refinement number 2, continued with the treatment and could achieve some kind of decent occlusion on the left and right side. Had to use a lot of attachments, as you can see. For settling, had to use some elastics, for some AP corrections on buttons. So a lot of things went into it because at that time, my goal was, I was trying to compare this with braces, right? So you're trying to finish the patient in that manner. And still there were some things that were not complete to my satisfaction. The diastema was still there. Too bad I couldn't finish the patient because the patient had to move and she was entering college. So she had to go to a different state. Perhaps she continued treatment here. But the bottom line is that this patient is like to show my initial few steps into aligners. That initial introduction of similar patients showed me that my journey would be a bit long with aligners because I was nowhere close to getting the same kind of satisfaction that I was getting through braces. So I'll take you through this journey that I did. I tried to understand what the aligner business was. What was the whole point of doing this? How are the aligners trying to move teeth? Because they don't look like braces, not at all. So they are doing something else to move teeth. How are they treating different malocclusions? What are the basic biomechanical foundations of aligners? Because they got to be different at the face of it from braces. And try to then understand all this from a first principles objective. That is, try to analyze its performance and shortcomings. And because I knew there would be shortcomings as I experienced in that one patient that I showed you and many more, so I had to find a way out of it. Number 1, how big is now the aligner industry? Of course, when I started, it was very tiny. At this point, the aligner industry comprises perhaps of more than 100 companies that I know of, that I've gathered through the literature. I'm sure there are many more that are unregistered and they are functioning. Specifically talking about Align Tech, which is the mother company for Invisalign. It's a more than $50 billion company at this point, and it occupies about, I would say, 35% to 45% of the share of the aligner business. So the total market is close to $200 billion, which is huge. That showed me, or it still shows me, that this is something important to gain knowledge into because it is growing at a very rapid pace. And so it's not a good idea to shy away from it or to throw darts at it and try to always find mistakes, but try to understand the mistakes and see if they can be improved or our orthodontics can be smartly tailored around it. We got to be also careful that because so much money is being invested in this company, there'll be a lot of gurus, salesmen, proponents, propagators of this technology who will in some way or the other try to push these aligners to you. So it's very important to step back and try to analyze how they work on a first principle basis. What are the tools of aligner mechanics? Now, I want to keep it simple and straightforward. So in this limited time, I'm not going to dive into the nitty-gritties. So broadly speaking, most of the aligner companies are approaching treatment with two approaches. The first approach on moving teeth that they adopt is called the shape molding effect. Many of us know what a shape molding effect is because at some stage of our career, we have gone to our labs, taken an impression of a patient, cut the teeth out on the mold, and rearranged them in an aligned manner or in the manner we want, and done a suck down Essex retainer or any kind of plastic retainer on it. So basically that retainer or that suck down Essex or aligner is forcing the teeth from a crowded position to an aligned position. So the whole shape of the aligner is pushing the teeth into its correct position. So this is known as the shape molding effect of moving teeth. That's I think the primary mechanism. Till this date, Invisalign follows. 80% of their movement is by the shape molding effect. The remaining 20% happens by something called as attachments. Now, these attachments are basically blobs of composite on the tooth that are transferred by trays. You would notice that at least one surface of this attachment is flat, straight, and perpendicular to the tooth surface. This is very critical for the proper delivery of force because it is this flat surface that takes up the force that is being applied by the aligners. Attachments is in certain situations a smart way of applying force, but in most, perhaps it is not. And that's why shape molding effect is the dominant way of moving teeth. And I'll show you why that is. So this is just one of my patients. Now, suppose I want to apply a lot of force on this premolar, just an example, to move it in a certain way. Now, either I can do by a shape molding effect or by using attachments. When I do a shape molding effect, maybe I'll distribute the force all over this surface. So for example, you're applying 200 gram force. You distribute it over the whole surface. So the stress absorbed by the tooth would be force by area, which will be 200 divided by the area of this tooth. Now let's assume this area is like what, 10 millimeters by 10 millimeters, so 100 millimeters square. So 200 by 100 gives you 2 gram millimeter square of stress, which is great. How about if we try to do the same with the attachment? So if I apply 200 gram force on this attachment won't be more than 10 millimeters square in surface area, even maybe smaller, assuming that you're only applying force on this flat, straight surface. That gives you a stress of about 20 grams per millimeter square. So the stress received by the attachment is way higher than by the shape. And try to just remember this point that the stress received by the attachment would be way higher, because we'll see later why greater stress is really bad for aligner biomechanics. Let's look at how aligners are treating basic malocclusions. I'll just quickly review them malocclusion by malocclusion to understand how they're moving teeth. I'll also add a little bit of my inputs that we have gathered through some systematic research. Let's look at deep bites. Deep bites are corrected by two basic mechanisms by aligners. Of course, with braces, we have like a ton of approaches to fix them, but aligners can only do it primarily by two ways. The first is, I like the name, that's why I stick to it. It's known as the watermelon seed effect. What it basically means is like if you take any seed, like an orange seed or even a watermelon seed, and try to squeeze it between two of your fingers, eventually it might slip out from one end. Okay, so the squeezing force gets transmitted straight out. That's the watermelon seed effect. How it works with aligners is that when you make an aligner for a teeth, you can have a shape molding effect going on where the aligner will try to compress the tooth from all directions. This is easy to make. So the net vector addition of all these forces causes a force to go straight through the center of resistance of the tooth. By the way, this is one unique thing of aligners that is really different from braces. That is, aligners can apply intrusive force literally through the three-dimensional center of resistance of a tooth, as opposed to braces, which find it really tough to do that because the braces only come on the surface of a tooth. So you can apply on the buccal surface or the lingual abrasives or the lingual surface. Never it has been possible to apply a force literally through the middle of a tooth. So that's where aligners have a huge advantage over braces. So this is the primary approach of fixing deep bites. The second approach, which I think is more propagated by the companies, is using the bite ramps. Bite ramps are literally like placing composite blobs on the lingual surface of teeth so that the bite is open and then the posterior teeth are free to extrude. So this is the other approach of fixing it. I think this contributes very little to the opening of the bite, because once you have disoccluded the dentition, you still need to pull down the posterior teeth. I think it's very tough to extrude teeth with aligners because the aligner is gripping onto the teeth to have retention, and at the same time you want to pull it down. Physics principles are basically violated when you try to do it. I'll give you an example. When your car is not working, what do? Right? I mean, assuming that everything else is fine, just the engine is not starting due to whatever, you get out of the car and you push it, right? So what you do, you get out of the car. You don't try to push the car by sitting inside the car. Intuitively, that won't work because it will violate Newton's third law if it worked. So the same happens with extrusion of aligners. You cannot pull a tooth down when you're trying to grip onto it to get retention. So that's why bite ramps have a limited ability to extrude teeth. Here's an example of a patient treated by deep bite, and generally with aligner cases, there's nothing much to show because it's all invisible, right? So anyway, aligner treatment was done and the deep bite was fixed. It was basically fixed by using the watermelon seed effect and less by the bite ramps. Anyway, just an example here. For the record, deep bites are not a great set of malocclusion to treat with aligners. What is a good malocclusion to treat are open bites. Now, if any of you have been skimming through the literature, you might have noticed that treatment of mild to moderate open bites is gaining a lot of popularity with aligners. The basic mechanics of how open bites are treated are still the same for deep bites. They use both attachments and the watermelon seed effect. However, here the watermelon seed effect or the squeezing action is utilized on the posterior teeth. So the posterior teeth are squeezed. And again, because you can get a force right through the center of resistance, it works great. At least they do not allow the teeth to extrude at all. The posterior teeth are very well controlled. And on the front teeth, well, you can try a lot of things. You can try bite ramps. You can try to extrude them. But as we have noted before, it's tough to push a car while you're sitting inside the car. So just keep that in mind. You have to come up with certain auxiliaries, something to extrude these teeth. So just by the aligners, it won't work. So these are the two ways by which aligner companies have said that the open bites can be solved. However, our research has shown something different is at play, which is primarily contributing to the open bite treatment. And that is the drawbridge effect. The drawbridge effect is basically like the London Bridge, where the bridges are raised for ships to pass by. So that's from where the drawbridge effect name comes. That is, the rollback of an object creates extrusion of it, superficial. So as an example, here you see, so green is the pre and blue is the post. So as the tooth is rolled back, you see an extrusion. This is not pure extrusion. It is called relative extrusion. This is the primary mechanism by which open bites can be closed. The other way of closing open bite is by something called as a slight autorotation of the jaw. That is, when you get a slight intrusive force on the posterior teeth, the effect on the front is magnified. So like a 1 millimeter intrusion of the molar can lead to anywhere between 2 to 4 millimeter correction of the overbite. On the right is the liver principle in action. So longer the liver arm, the greater would be the correction. So the molar can be considered as the pivot and the incisor as the other end of the liver. So the more you intrude the molars, the more magnified will be the effect on the overbite. How do we know this? Well, we recently did a research that got published last year, I think, where I was involved in very intricately with this research. And we went pretty nerdy with it to figure out what is causing open bites to close. What we did here is that we got 40 open bite patients that were treated with aligners. And we critically evaluated the records to see how teeth are moving. And we did some crazy math in it, not recommended. But the result was great because we could nail down how open bites are being fixed. So to give you a quick summary, 3 to 4 millimeters of overbite closure was being done. And as you can see in this slide, the primary mechanism by which it was happening was, of course, by upper incisor, lower incisor extrusion and molar intrusion. The thing to catch here is by extrusion, what we meant was the majority, 37.9% on the bottom left of your screen, was having by relative extrusion, aka the drawbridge effect. Okay. Another 19% of the lower relative extrusion, again, by the drawbridge effect. If you combine the drawbridge effect, you're getting almost 60% of the correction. All right. The rest of it, majority of it, close to 30%, is by autorotation of the jaw or by molar intrusion. So 60% drawbridge effect, 30% by some molar intrusion, 90% correction is happening by these two mechanisms. So if somebody is out there and trying to extrude their teeth or the patient's teeth by giving attachments and stuff, don't do it. You don't need it. Research after research now is sort of highlighting to it. So just keep this in mind when you're trying to treat open bite patients. Go for the molars intrusion if you can, and then look for the drawbridge effect. Now, if there are spaces, then you can use the drawbridge effect. But how about this? This is one of our patients here where there is no spaces, right? You have to create spaces. Now, you can extract. Yes, you can. But be careful when you extract in patients you're treating with aligners. Just be careful. And we'll come to that. Why be careful with extractions? So the moment you get a patient like this, you got to center down upon IPR. Because you need the spaces and you need the drawbridge effect to fix them. So this is what we did in this patient. We had a lot of intrusion going on in the molars, which who knows worked or not. But I think primarily we did IPR and we rolled back the teeth and the open bite was closed. Retention is a totally different story. I don't want to get into retention of open bites, but just be prepared to lose 50% of your open bite of the overbite that you see here in relapse. Just be mentally prepared. Space closure. Now, again, this is what is proposed by all these aligner companies or the aligner gurus out there. The fundamental basis for any tooth movement is that when you apply a force on the crown, you get a dumping of the tooth or a moment of force that causes that dumping. If you want to control tooth movement, you have to either get rid of this dumping moment or counteract it by an opposing moment. With braces, it is pretty easy to do, right? Because the wires lock in the brackets And this generates a couple, which creates this red moment on the left side of your screen. And you control the movement of the teeth, either knowingly or unknowingly, but it does happen. With aligners, you have to consciously apply this moment. And how is that applied? Usually in the form of those attachments. However, I think if you read carefully through your ClinChecks that comes to these companies, a lot of shape molding effect is also going on. So anyways, the bottom line is that you have to apply, or the aligner company has to apply these kind of attachments or these couple forces to create this red moment. So whenever you're treatment planning space closure, just clarify with the company or see on your ClinCheck that how are they creating this counter moment. And you can move these attachments around to increase it or decrease it. Basically, you want to have maximal separation between these two attachments in the vertical plane. The more you get separation between these two attachments, the more moment you can create. Again, here's an example. It's a cartoon, I know, but this is how here the root is being controlled by applying these equal and opposite forces, and you get a moment on the canine. Another way of applying, the second way of applying this is by using power ridges. Now, power ridges can either be ordered through these companies. You can ask them to put power ridges, or there are special pliers that come to apply these power ridges. Now, power ridges are basically strong indents that you create by compressing the plastic with a plier or any sharp instrument. Once it creates an indent, it will push down on the tooth as shown on this picture. It is basically used for incisor torque or root movement. As you can see here, equal and opposite forces can be created on opposite surfaces, and you can start generating the same couple or moment to control it. Anytime you see these attachments and power ridges, always think about the stress, that these are applying very high stress at these regions. And as I said before, I'm going to come back to it to tell you what can be the possible ramifications of these stresses. So here's just an example to show space closure. Say I've got a patient, a lot of anterior spaces. The space was closed for sure, but a lot of lateral open bite is happening. Now, this is not my patient, but I had similar patients that showed this kind of lateral open bite happening after space closure. You can prevent it, but I think there'll be a pretty high chance you will get it at some stage or the other. And this is a slide that I have stolen from Align Tech. I was close enough to get some interesting material on it. And this is one of the ways by which they show how they are closing space. So they say that you have aligners, you'll apply Newton's law here, equal and opposite forces will be created by an aligner gradually, and the spaces will close. What they fail to highlight here is that whenever aligners are applying this force, basic biomechanics tells you that forces would be equal and opposite. So the amount of anterior retraction force will be same as posterior protraction force. There's no way to prevent it, as opposed with braces where you can do a lot of stuff to prevent it. And now these moments are not equal and opposite because they are dependent on the location of center of resistance. The further higher the center of resistance, more would be the moments. But you see, this moments will cause the posterior teeth to tip forward, which is not desirable. However, the front is desirable. So this posterior tip forward ends up causing your aligners to bow up, as it would cause even a wire to bow up, right? So this bowing of the aligner as the space is being closed is primarily responsible for creating this lateral open bite. By the way, if this does show up, it is a very tough thing to fix. You have to go for refinements after refinements to fix it. And again, I'm not leaving you hanging in there. I'll get into it as to how get out of these situations if you have one. Once you know that aligners are doing all these movements, you go ahead and you start treating with aligners, okay? And once you are treated a lot of patients, you want to know that how good your aligners performing. What I'll do in the next few slides is that I will show you a summary, a critical summary or a critical review of what others, that is hundreds of other practitioners who have documented their results, have experienced while moving teeth. So we'll look at tipping, we'll look at translation, we'll look at rotation, we'll look at space closure as to if you're trying to implement these things with aligners, what are you ordering and then what are you receiving? Right. Now, tipping is the most common type of tooth movement that we do. So imagine that you are doing a aligner treatment and you plan for X millimeter of tipping. Okay? And if you planned X millimeter of tipping and you did the whole treatment, how much did you get through the set of aligners you ordered? The literature shows that whatever you plan, you will get 54% only out of that. Now, mind you, you have to compare it with something. With braces, you get almost 100%, right? If you want to tip a tooth, it does tip. There's no like, yes, I applied a chain on wires and braces. Oh, my tooth only tipped instead of 4 millimeters, which I thought it would tip, it tipped only 2 millimeters. No, it doesn't happen that way. If you have the space, you'll get full 4 millimeters of tipping. With aligners, that's not the case. When you plan out a movement in a certain set of trays, you don't get all of it. With tipping, you get 54% only. What about if you're trying to derotate a tooth? So if you planned certain amount of movement, if the rotation is less than 15 degrees, let's say it's a mild rotation, you will still achieve 43% of correction. However, if the rotation is more severe, that is greater than 15, 20, 25, 30, your efficiency of correction just drops down. Literature shows it's about 23%. There's a lot of variation in this, but this is the average. So you lose a lot of correction if you have more severe rotations to fix. How about vertical movement? So let's say intrusion. For intrusion, again, if you're planning X millimeter of intrusion, you will get only about 35%. And the bottom figure is in severe patients where you get basically barely 20%. One thing that I want to point out here is that these are our planned tooth movements, so it doesn't reflect like people are building overcorrection also. So treat this data with that factor in mind, that whatever you're planning may also incorporate overcorrection. How about posterior extrusion, which says right there at the bottom right corner of this screen, people have yet to observe desirable posterior extrusion of teeth. So it's very tough to extrude posterior teeth with aligners. Actually, the data on this is really very interesting. They were trying intrusion in 189 patients, and barely 41 got more than 1 to 1.5 millimeter, and only 2 or 3 patients got more than 2 millimeters of pure intrusion. How about root movements or translation for that matter? If you are planning that, if you're an extraction patient or you plan to do torquing, how much of the planning that you did really translated into clinical output? You can take a guess. It has not yet been observed. We have not yet observed on a consistent basis. I'm not talking about isolated patients here or there, but on a consistent basis, successful space translation, space closure, or the even tougher root correction or root movement. And why do I say that? Of course, personal experience, and I'll show one of them later, and also of the literature that has been reported. So far, it has been very difficult to conduct a study on this because ethically it becomes tough to conduct a full-fledged space closure study with aligners. Fortunately, there have been now 3 researches that have been conducted that have literally trickled over the years, like one by one. They have come over the past 5 years. So the research is slow. But the first one that came out was from University of Washington. And it came out a while ago. What they did here was they had like 24 patients getting all 4 premolars extracted, right? And they said, all right, we are going to start closing space with aligners. And they went ahead and started closing with aligners. Through the treatment, more than 50% of the patients had to be moved out of the study and switched to braces. Many of the patients had to be switched from different protocols of aligners because the movement was not happening. So when everything was all said and done, only 1 patient out of the 24 subjects completed space closure. The rest went to fixed braces. And that 1 patient had a pan that looked like this. This is the actual pan from the study. And you can clearly see the enormous amount of tipping galore that has happened. So needless to say, this patient was also switched to braces immediately when they saw the pan, and as stated in the paper yourself. And all kudos to these authors who were pretty honest to spell this out, because we don't see a lot of honesty in terms of showing what was the true outcome of your treatment in the literature. This was the first paper that came out, and subsequently others got interested, and this was followed by another paper that I believe was in the Angle Orthodontist that came out, and they had kind of similar protocol. They had 30 patients, underwent extraction. I've taken out the data and created a little cartoon to show what they were trying to do. So you can see that they were planning something for the anchorage control, and they were planning something for the incisor retraction. And on the bottom, I'll try to show what they finally achieved. Now, their goal was to preserve anchorage. They said to themselves, in the ClinCheck, we are going to create a 2.94 degrees. That's the data stated by them, about 3 degrees of distal tip. But we know reality is that we are going to lose some anchorage. So we are going to assume that we are going to lose about 1 millimeter of anchorage. What did they actually achieve after that planning when the treatment was done? Well, they did get anchor loss. Instead of getting a 2.94 degrees distal tip, they got the same amount of tip forward. And overall, at the end of the day, they got about 3 millimeters of the crown coming forward. And if you can calculate, that would mean about almost a millimeter and millimeter of the half, the root coming forward. So it was tip forward of the molar instead of tip back as they had planned. Now, how about the incisors? Well, the incisors, they were confident and said, we are going to get pretty good movement of the incisor. We'll go for a little bit of translation with minimal tipping. So just 9 degrees of tipping and a lot of crown movement, more than 6 millimeters of crown movement. Of course, they had to go for 6 millimeters of crown movement if you assume that you're going to get barely a millimeter of anchor loss. So pretty ambitious, according to me. What they got was a perfect uncontrolled tipping. They don't say that in the paper, but you can take the numbers and calculate for yourself. And these are numbers that they stated. They got 4 millimeters of crown movement back, but they got almost 15 degrees of tipping. And they have stated in the paper that the root moved in the opposite direction by about a millimeter. And that is why if you put all these numbers together, you come to the conclusion that instead of getting controlled tipping to translation, they ended up getting a big uncontrolled tipping. Very interesting to see, as it kind of beautifully backed up the paper by the Greg Huang group. And there was nothing different here. And I think recently there was a paper that came out in the KJ, I mean, not recently now, again, a few years back, where they went further and they said that they just quickly measured the discrepancy. By discrepancy, I mean what they planned and what they achieved. So for the crown, you can see the discrepancy is not that crazy. They pretty much achieved what they wanted to. But again, when they went for the root, there's a lot of discrepancy of about 2 to 3 millimeters on an average. And this is not a small number because they never plan to move the root anyway more than 2 to 3 millimeters. So if you plan to move 2 to 3 millimeters and you get the same discrepancy, it's not wonderful news. Okay, that clearly tells you, actually they have stated in their conclusion better than what I can say here. And if you guys can read it on the screen, that would be great. Crowns, but not roots, can be moved to designated positions using clear aligners, primarily because such appliances cause tooth movement only by tilting motion. So if I put all the literature together without even putting my experience into it, this is my conclusion as far as the movement goes, that tipping is the only feasible movement. It's very tough to say that about braces, right? But for aligners, the evidence is just overwhelmingly clear that tipping is the only feasible movement. There's a lot more research to be done. So any of the new innovators out there who want to do something new, there you go. You have so many other movements that you can create. Go ahead and try to do it. There's a lot of scope. That's the good news. Improvise, right? Try to work around it. Try to see how we can still incorporate this in our practice and be just smart at making our decisions around aligners. We can only do that if we try to dive deep into it. and understand why aligners are not able to move teeth as efficiently as braces. First principles based understanding really goes a long way. And we experienced that with the OpenBite study that I showed you. We had no clue there was such a big drawbridge effect going on for OpenBite correction, or the posterior intrusion, although mild, was playing a huge role. We just found out that by going to the first principles of trigonometry and math and applying it to orthodontics, and it gave us beautiful insight of how to treat open bites. So similarly, let's apply this here to understand why only tilting motions. Why not any root movement? Why not any kind of translation? Fundamental basis of tooth movement is an interplay of this dumping moment and then the counter moment that you are putting. This creates the myriad types of tooth movement that you see. Now, braces and aligners approach it in different ways. Braces create this moment by using a wire in a bracket, and you can increase the size of the wire, apply torque, apply V-bends to create this moments. You don't have the same luxury with Invisalign or with any other kind of aligners that you're using. This is the basic constraint. And this constraint is very obvious because when you go about measuring what a wire and a bracket can deliver in terms of force and moment, you will see how greatly aligners underperform. With braces, you have the ability to quickly switch wires, increase the size of the wires. With aligners, you are stuck. It's made out of a plastic that is not decided by you, but decided by the manufacturer. And you got to do what you can do with it. So that's the number one constraint. So let's look at how much we are underperforming in terms of force delivery. Let's say that we are trying to push that canine back into the arch with wires. We know it's a child's play. You put in a wire, and that single wire, be it a Ni-Ti, be it a beta titanium, be it even some kind of stainless steel, multi-stranded for that matter, is going to eventually push it in, just one wire. And if you want to do the same with aligners, well, how many aligners do you need? Maybe like 15, 20, 25, 30, 10. I don't know. You need multiple aligners to get there. So why are we going through so many aligners? Okay. Why do we have to do that? Well, this graph will tell you and give you the answer. So forget the red and the black line. Just treat it as one consistent line. This graph is measuring stress spread across over a period of time. For easy understanding, just replace stress in your head with force. If you feel easier to grasp it that way, so just replace stress with force. So you start with a certain amount of force on the left side of the graph. So just say it's a very high force, right? And now you follow the minutes on the bottom graph. Just from 20 to 40 to 60, by the time you go to 100 minutes, one aligner loses close to 90% or 80% of its force delivery capacity. And this is very, very interesting. And why this is interesting? Because if you plotted the graph of a steel on a Ni-Ti wire, it would be straight. They don't lose anything over 60 minutes, 80 minutes, 100 minutes, or 120 minutes. In fact, they don't lose anything, especially in Ni-Ti, even over 30 days. They constantly apply a force. However, an aligner drastically loses force. If you can remember this graph, this is a good graph to remember, is known as a stress relaxation graph. If a sales rep or a guru of some company comes to sell you aligners, just ask for this graph. Like, how good is your stress relaxation graph? The gentler the slope, automatically better the aligner. Easy does it. And every company has a stress relaxation graph. If you dig deeper, they will provide you that. They have to provide it. And if some company does not have it, they're basically weak on R&D. So they need to do it better. And this is what good studies are analyzing on a continuous basis. Here there's another study where besides measuring force, they have also measured moment or the torque, that we want to create with aligners. And they did it on all the three planes of space. So anyway, that is not important. What's important to see, you see how the green and red lines are dropping down to 0. So every peak is a new aligner. You can count the number of aligners that were given. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So every peak is an aligner. And you see every peak immediately goes down to 0 very quickly. And that's the drop in the force. That's the stress relaxation that the aligners are exhibiting. One interesting conclusion they had was data clearly demonstrated that each aligner, although creates very high force, this is then followed by an exponential decrease in the forces or the moments it is creating. So good luck creating any kind of root torque or root control that you want to do with these kinds of aligners. Because remember one thing, that if you want to create some kind of root control, on an average, you need about 2000 gram millimeter of torque, okay? And if you need 2000 gram millimeter of torque, which is pretty high because you need root control, the force that you need to create on these two attachments or buttons you are placing would be approximately 200 grams, right? Assuming that 10 millimeters is the distance between the two forces. So 200 times 10, 2000. So 2000 is a lot of force for aligners to do because they are losing force very fast. Maybe one way of seeing, what if we create more force to begin with? Okay, so we create more force, we might lose then relatively less force at the end of the day. This has been played around with too. So what if we build more activations to our aligners? That is, every aligner is supposed to do more movement so that the initial force is high. So there was a study that was done which did 0.5 millimeter activation, which is more than the standard of 0.25 or 0.3 millimeter, but they did 0.5, 1. They also had a 0.75. I'm not included it here, but basically to show low activation 0.5 and high activation 1 millimeter. And you need not go deep into the graphs. Just in general, if you look at the 0.5 millimeters activation, the force levels are like between 2 and 3. And when you go to that 1 millimeter activation, you see overall the force has dropped in between 1 to 2 newtons. You see that with more activation, force actually is going down for one particular tray, which is not good news at all, right? That means more activations are not working to increase the force. So more activation, less force. What actually works if you want to increase the force is if you order for thicker aligners, then you get a greater force. Maybe a smart idea can be that when you approach some root torquing moments or space closure, thicker aligners might be better. As of now, as much as I know, at least with Invisalign and 3M and other companies, they're not playing a lot with the thickness of the aligners. They don't offer different thickness aligners according to the stage of treatment you are in. But the research indicates that if you want more force, more moment, maybe thickness can play a role. There's one important caveat to understand, that if you apply more force initially, here's a research that shows what happens. So the top two graphs are done with thicker aligners, the F22 aligner and the Ercolock Pro aligner, which is like a more of a scientific name for a particular aligner brand, aligner material. Thicker the aligners, you see how the force is dropping even much more quicker with these aligners than the ones with thinner aligners. However, you do start with more force, but the drop is pretty hard. The thinner aligners give you a more consistent force. So I would say that you can read this graph into saying that if somebody wants more of tipping movements, go with the thinner aligners. If you want torque or moment, the research indicates thicker aligners might be better. This is a study whose link is right here because I didn't include it in the notes below. Based on all these principles of applying moment and torque, that you can go for thicker aligners and keep the activation low, we have consciously tried to incorporate this in our patients. This is one of my patients. He wanted specifically aligners. The goal was to align the teeth without running into a negative overjet, because there's so much crowding on the lower that we could easily flare these teeth forward. And the pan, you can see the upper left has a slight space. He wanted that space to be closed if possible. I started treating the patient, had a bunch of attachments. I think I probably went around like 3 or 4 times with Invisalign to build in all sorts of modifications. I think I ordered 90 to 95 trays, as many trays as possible, small activations, and started treating the patient. Kept on moving the teeth, did a bunch of IPR, tried to flare the upper teeth, did more IPR on the bottom, of course, because you don't want to run into a negative overjet. Was a very, very tough movement. And as you can see, started to also close the gap. Try to use some auxiliaries for additional torque and all that. I won't go into the details of that, but basically what our treatment plan was to apply a lot of torque to the molars by keeping the force application as wide as possible. So if I was applying a force here on this crown, the other force was in the gingival portion to keep maximum distance between the two to get a decent root torque. Ordered many trays so that we keep on fixing the root. Anyways, kept on doing it. And then finally, at this stage, after about a year of treatment, we thought, okay, we are going to enter a refinement stage because we are in an edge-to-edge bite and we have closed the space. So let us check how we are doing. Look at the upper left posterior molar. We didn't get any root movement at all, I think. Although consciously we were thinking we were applying a lot of torque and trying to make it as efficient as possible. I mean, molars are not a good candidate anytime for root torque, but regardless, it just didn't work out. So there was a lot of tipping. We made the patient aware of it, that there's a lot of tipping, and without braces, the chances of fixing that are pretty low. And the patient accepted the fact. We went through our refinement. We fixed whatever else we could fix, eventually let go of the patient, making the patient aware of the fact that you have a tipped molar right there. So there can be periodontal implications down the line. It kind of beautifully aligned with the literature, unfortunately, about the root effects. To go one layer below, why does an aligner experience so much of stress relaxation? Like, why does the force drop? And the answer to this is actually lies in the modulus of elasticity. Modulus of elasticity is basically trying to measure the energy an appliance can transmit somewhere else. Like you can almost say the stored potential energy it can absorb and then transmit it to move teeth, to move stuff, in general. That's modulus of elasticity for you. So in our terms, it combines force and activation together. Okay. That means you can get force application, a lot of activation, and so a lot of movement. That's modulus of elasticity. So at the end of the day, higher the modulus of elasticity, more are the chances that the stuff can move things around more efficiently. So let's compare. Okay, these are all the materials at the bottom row that we use in orthodontics: stainless steel, beta titanium, nitires, and now clear aligners. So on this graph, where does stainless steel land? Well, this is the Mount Everest, right? It's the peak. It almost touches 300 gigapascals. That's the unit for stress. It's a lot of stress and force it can apply, and a lot of activation will give you a lot of force. So great method for delivering a lot of energy. Beta titanium, a radical drop to about 70 to 80 gigapascals. It's way smaller. How about austenitic or martensitic nitide? They are pretty low too, around the 50s. And the martensitic nitide is about 30 GPa. And again, values can vary depending on which research you're going to. I don't know if you guys can imagine how much would be clear aligners on this graph. I had to force myself to draw something because it was ridiculously low. It's almost close to 0 on a GPa scale, gigapascals. So you have to enter the world of megapascals, which is a smaller unit. And it gets very, very low. And if you guys are interested in saying that maybe some other company works better, maybe my company is better in terms of delivering modulus of elasticity, you're more than welcome to read this article, which analyzes not just 1, 2, 3, but 3, 4, I think there were even more different polymers that make up aligners. And you would see that they are ridiculously low. As you can see, they're in single digits right here, 2, 2.5, 3. So the modulus of elasticity is super bad. A relative comparison on our famous stress strain graph. And where is the clear aligners here? Well, if you can see the red dot at the bottom left of the screen, right there, that's where aligners are. So it is very low, as I said, about 1 to 2 GPa. So that's the root cause. Your aligners are not equipped to deliver that much energy to start moving teeth in radical manners. Okay. So this is like, if you want to call it, what's the first principle reason? This is the first principle reason that you got to deal with. And by the way, this is like 40 times smaller than a martensitic nitide, which is supposed to be the most flexible wire in our profession, which nobody wants to use for translation, right? Nobody wants to use a night eye for root correction. And still our night eye is 40 times better than the best clear aligner on the market. So you're dealing with a stuff that is so much inferior. So this is how it translates when you apply all this at the clinical level, right? So for example, this is one of your patients and you want to just align the teeth. You want to go from the left image to the right image. Now let's assume that you are planning 10 trays on it or whatever these are. Let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 trays, okay, on it. And every tray will do a certain movement. One tray will do this whole orange or yellow span of movement. Okay. And the next will do certain next. And by the time you hit the last tray, the teeth are beautifully aligned. Now, after learning all that we have learned, that how aligners underperform, how much force loss is there and blah, 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 you can easily say, whatever I've planned, I'm barely going to get maybe 50% or 60%, being very optimistic of it. And I'll lose 30% of the planned correction. Every tray will lose 30% or 40%, whatever it might be. On top of it, if you have not achieved what you wanted to achieve with tray 1, it is carried as a baggage to the next tray. So actually, this is still underestimation. You would underachieve even more here on the next tray and the next tray and the next tray. And gradually you hit a point where you say, I need to go for refinements. Having 2 or 3 sets of refinements is not uncommon, and it adds more money, consumes more chair time. It adds a lot of dissatisfaction. And then you start contemplating of switching to braces. This is the blueprint of refinements and as to why it happens. This was one of my patients whose ClinCheck I've shown. And this is exactly what happened. 10 trays were insufficient. And aligner companies do that again and again. Whenever I'm treatment planning with Invisalign, they would be very conservative in giving me aligners. Like they try to do these movements in 10 trays or 12 trays. And if I do that, I'm sure I always end up going for refinements. So I hate that because then I have to scan again, put the attachments again, take the old attachments off and go through that cycle, which is pretty annoying. So this is all what can go wrong with aligners. A quick recap. All these aligner material, doesn't matter which company you're using, is giving you, first of all, very low force. It's better to do less activation because they are equipped to only carry out less activation. They have low flexibility. In fact, using the term flexibility is a disservice. There's hardly any flexibility. It can deform pretty quick. There's a rapid force decay. No matter from what force level you start, unless you are very force level when it kind of stays. And overall, there's less transfer of energy, unlike stainless steel or brackets, where there's almost 80 to 90% transfer of energy at the macro level, at least. So all these features tell you something about these materials. These materials are not rigid like steel. They're not flexible like night eyes. They are not elastic like rubber bands. What are these? All aligners are basically viscoelastic material. And any of you go ahead and Google this up, right? Viscoelastic material. Viscoelastic materials are good for what? They are good at absorbing shocks. So they are dampeners. You put force and they'll dampen the force. They're good at dissipating any energy you supply to it in the form of heat. They don't transfer that energy as kinetic energy for movement of teeth. So just be aware. Metals are the opposite. They will transfer the energy that you are supplying in the form of kinetic energy and move teeth. Or your rubber bands, they will supply that elastic and they will go almost 1:3, 1:2, depending on how you use them. All viscoelastic materials are actually good they're very good for retainers, because even if inadvertently you apply some activation on your retainers, these retainers will act as force dampeners. So your tooth won't relapse more than a certain amount. Okay. And this is what historically they were used for. When it started from Kessling and went to Naums and others, they were using it as aligners of a very minor movement so that you do the movement and then you retain it. You got to be humble and realize the limitations of aligners. To sum it up, treatment with aligners, what did we learn? Here, what we learned is what I can give you as a clinician. Maybe it will be useful to you, maybe not. But whatever I'm going to state in the next 2 slides have been hugely useful for me. Immense benefits so far. Number 1, use more trays. I would implore, if it's not coming at a big cost to you, it does not come to me at a big cost when I order these trays. Use as many trays as possible. I'm now almost down to using 2 trays per week. There was one patient in whom I used 1 tray per day. So it was literally like that guy was changing contacts in the morning for his eyes. He used to also change his trays for his mouth. And the reason for that is I am ordering less activation per tray from the aligner companies. I'm telling them, please don't move teeth a lot per tray. Can you make it less? So less movements would mean I would automatically need more trays, which works because if I build in more activation per tray, the force just goes to 0 even faster and the force is even lower. And I pile up more errors as I go along. So a lot of trays, less activation. So for me, baseline, every movement, every treatment is going like 80 trays, 90 trays. What has this done to me is that I'm not doing a lot of refinements. Between thinner and thicker material, if you're planning a lot of milder to tipping kind of movements, thinner is great, which most of the aligner companies give you. If you have the ability to switch to a different company who applies a thicker material, I don't know if you want to do that way or if your aligner company is open to adjustment, but thicker material would be better for the heavier movements like torquing or translation. Whenever you're trying to solve a malocclusion with aligner, think how you can solve it by just tipping the teeth. You can go for root control aspirationally, but don't please build a lot of it into your treatment. If you're treating with a crossbite, think if you can fix it just by tipping. If you're trying space closure, see if it is possible to just tip the teeth. Tipping is the most predictable movement that you can build into aligners. Research has shown is that you want your patients to not take their aligners on and off quite frequently. The more patients take their aligners on and off through the day, the lesser force they create. So you can see on the graph on the right side, the more times they are taking their aligners on and off, so you see 10 times, 20 times, 30 times in a day or 2 or a week, more is the drop in the force. I always have this graph in my mind, the Dunning-Kruger effect given by a famous Nobel laureate on how your experience with anything would work. And this has truly worked me for aligners. When I started with aligners, after treating a few patients, I was at the peak of this graph in my level of confidence. I was like, whoa, these things are great. They work so seamlessly. And I would make all my 80%, 90% of my practice aligners. And then as you gain more knowledge and experience, you hit a slump where you see that you actually don't know much about it. And there's so much more to learn. I experienced this graph through my residency, through my practice, and now with aligners. Like in my second year of residency, I was so confident with everything. When I came to UConn, I learned that I didn't know much. And then I had to go up this graph slowly. The one thing that I've learned, not because I love biomechanics, but I think this is the truth, is biomechanics is the law. And everything else that you hear around yourself is just recommendation. Stick with the basic science principles and you'll be a very happy orthodontist. I try to imbibe this to my residents here through all my courses. I'm not here to tell them what to think. That's their life, their choice. They can think what they want about appliances, techniques. I just hope through my teachings, they can learn the art of how to think. Okay. It was wonderful sharing all this information with you. So thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Oh, I got a real good feeling.